when we talk about effects, we don't necessarily want to look at suffering effects. We want, like everybody said in the beginning, I want to be happy, right? So we all think, I want to be happy. We didn't say, I want to be happy and not to suffer. We say, we want to be happy. The unfortunate part of that is, we're not looking at the other part of the equation. If you say, I want to be happy, you have to look at the other part of the equation, and I don't want to suffer, right? Because one relates to the other. If there was no suffering, we'd have no word called happiness, right? If there was no suffering, how could you have happiness? One relates to the other. What do we call happiness in our present state? Buddha would say is not happiness, he would say it's pleasure. So you have to investigate the difference between pleasure and happiness, right? Pleasure is the alleviation of suffering. The alleviation of suffering. I'm not going to write it. She knows. So you define pleasure as the alleviation of suffering. And if the truth is suffering, what we're doing is alleviating that suffering, and those moments of alleviation are what we call happiness. But they're not long-term, unconditioned happiness, it's conditioned. We need the conditions around us for us to be happy. The car, the TV, we talked about this, right? So we need those because that's the alleviation of our suffering, and then we say, oh, I'm happy. So a famous example that Lama Geshe used to give was, that Lama Geshe said to people, so what do you call happiness? He used to call everybody dear. So, dear, what do you call happiness? This was in the 1970s. And when he first started teaching around the world, and he'd come from Tibet, you know, and never seen the ocean, never seen the beach, things like this. So he was in Australia, in Brisbane, and they said, oh, Lama, we go to the beach. And he said, beach? Yes, you must go to the beach. This is happiness. Okay, we'll go to the beach. So he said, so what do I wear? They said, you need shorts. Okay, so he put shorts on, a t-shirt on, went down to the beach, big towel, hat. Now what do we do? They said, this is it. Oh, so this is what you call happiness. Yes. So what else do? We go in the water. Okay, so went in the water, paddled around a little bit, came out. So now what do? Just lie here. Oh, so lay there, but I'm getting too hot. Okay, now you go back in the water, right? So you go backwards and forwards. So this is an example of the alleviation of suffering, that when you're in the sun too long, you suffer, and then to alleviate that suffering, you go into the cold water. You stay in the cold water too long, you start to suffer, you come back out, and that's what we do, right? We're alleviating our suffering. So then Lama said, okay, so what else do? Oh, we put oil, you know? So we put oil and we get brown. Oh, so put oil, you know, lay in the sun. And he said, this is just like being a fish on a grill, you know? So you get a fish and you put it on a barbecue. He said, it's just like a fish on a grill. I feel like a fish. So I feel like I'm being toasted, you know, cooked on both sides. So he saw our happiness in a completely different way. Not the way Westerners see happiness, but he saw it as the alleviation of suffering. That I'm too hot, I turn. I'm too hot, I turn. You know, like being on the grill. And then I get really hot, I go back in the water. Then I get too cold, I come out of the water, I get too hot. So there's constant alleviation. And then he said, so what else do? And they said, we go to a club. Oh, so what do I need to wear for a club? You wear pants, a shirt, jacket. Okay, we'll go to a club. So I think in Hawaii, he went to a club and he went dancing, you know, in the club. So he said, so what do we do now? They said, we dance. So they danced, and then, so what do we do now? We sit down. And then, now what do? We dance. It's the same thing. Dance floor, sit down. Dance floor, sit down. So wherever he was going, he was investigating, what do you call happiness? Then he started developing all these teachings on chocolate. Everybody thought he was completely addicted to chocolate because he was talking about chocolate all the time. But what he saw in the monastery was people had to eat chocolate. You know, I'm suffering, where's the shop? I must buy chocolate. So when I first went to the monastery, it's amazing how much chocolate you eat, because you're hearing all these concepts that are so difficult for you. You rush for the shop, you know, and you buy chocolate cake, and then you think, well, it's not so bad. I'm not suffering so much now, because we're alleviating the suffering with chocolate and chocolate cake or cheesecake. But it's not the body, the stomach, that's suffering, right? When you hear this idea, the truth of suffering, it's not your stomach that's suffering, it's your mind that's suffering. But your mind says, buy chocolate. That will alleviate the suffering. So then you eat the chocolate, and then you think, oh, yeah, I feel a bit better. It's okay now. Or I drink coffee, or I drink tea, whatever it is. We're alleviating the suffering through physical means. But it's not the physical that's suffering. It's mental. Doing these negative actions with negative emotions is what we can call suffering, right? When we have that left side picture, we're suffering. We're not happy. And then when we alleviate that suffering, that's what we call happiness, but it's not real happiness. Still, the happiness is not because of no conditions, the happiness is because of conditions. And so it goes on like that.